God order, but instead it was the people up that selected Oliver Cromwell. And so his initial impression of Thomas Hobbes was that Thomas Hobbes was supporting him. Some of his counselors, though, argued that Thomas Hobbes looked like he was really supporting King Charles, and being afraid of what might happen, Thomas Hobbes fled to France and spent some time there. Once the coast looked clear, he came back. So that was something that Hobbes did frequently. But here's how he discusses religion. Seeing there are no signs nor fruit of religion but in man only, there is no cause to doubt, but that the seed of religion is also only in man, and consisteth in some peculiar quality, or at least in some eminent degree thereof, not to be found in other living creatures. And first, it is peculiar to the nature of man to be inquisitive into the causes of the events they see, some more, some less, but all men so much as to be curious in the search of the causes of their own good and evil fortune. Secondly, upon the sight of anything that hath a beginning, to think also it had a cause which determined the same to begin then when it did, rather than sooner or later. Thirdly, whereas there is no other felicity of beasts, but the enjoying of their quotidian food, ease and lusts, as having little or no foresight of the time to come, for want of observation and memory of the order, consequence, and dependence of the things they see, man observeth how one event hath been produced by another, and remembereth in them antecedents and consequence. And when he cannot assure himself of the true causes of things, for the causes of good and evil fortune for the most part are invisible, he supposes causes of them, either such as his own fancy suggests, or trusteth to the authority of other men, such as he thinks to be his friends and wiser than himself. The two first make anxiety, for being assured that there be causes of all things that have arrived hitherto, or shall arrive hereafter, it is impossible for a man who continually endeavoureth to secure himself against the evil he fears, and procure the good he desireth, not to be in a perpetual solicitude of the time to come, so that every man, especially those that are over-provident and are in an estate like to that of Prometheus, for as Prometheus, which interpreted is the prudent man, was bound to the hill Caucasus, a place of large prospect where an eagle, feeding on his liver, devoured in the day as much as was repaired in the night, so that man which looks too far before him in the care of future time, hath his heart all the day long gnawed on by fear of death, poverty, or other calamity, and has no repose, nor cause of his anxiety but in sleep. This perpetual fear, always accompanying mankind in the ignorance of causes, as it were in the dark, must needs have for object something. And therefore, when there is nothing to be seen, there is nothing to accuse either of their good or evil fortune, but some power or agent invisible, in which sense perhaps it was that some of the old poets said that the gods were at first created by human fear, which spoken of the gods, that is to say, of the many gods of the Gentiles, is very true. But the acknowledging of one God, eternal, infinite, and omnipotent, may more easily be derived from the desire men have to know the causes of natural bodies and their several virtues and operations than from the fear of what was to befall them in time to come. For he that from any effect he seeth come to pass should reason to the next and immediate cause thereof, and from thence to the cause of that cause, and plunge himself profoundly in the pursuit of causes, shall at last come to this, that there must be, as even the heathen philosophers confessed, that would be Aristotle, one first mover, that is, a first and an eternal cause of all things, which is that which men mean by the name of God. And all this without thought of their fortune, the solicitude whereof both inclines to fear and hinders them from the search of the causes of other things, and thereby gives occasion of feigning of as many gods as there be men that feign them, etc., etc., etc. So, the way I read this is he's being very careful. I conclude that actually he meant to argue for those that were reading him, if you were smart enough to catch his drift, that all the gods were essentially invented by men as a result of this perpetual fear. Even the one that he says, well, of course, this one, so what is he doing there? He's making sure that any church analysis of his writing comes across with, he's just criticizing the pagan gods, the multitude of pagan gods, the pantheo, I want to say. What's the name of the building in Rome that's dedicated to all the gods? It has the eye at the center. It's the biggest dome Romans made. Pantheon. No, that's not it. Shoot, I can't think of it. I'll find it. Can't live in a world where we have all the knowledge right there. Roman Pantheon.
EON.
Theo. Okay, so there it is. There's a open circle. That was dedicated to all the gods. So yeah, it looks like he's saying all those gods were, clearly invented by men, to explain the things that they actually didn't explain, really. But at the same time, there is, the one God. A lot of people read Thomas Hobbes and think he was actually agnostic, at least, as to whatever. Or he accepted the idea that Aristotle did, that there's a first mover, a creator, or something that moves everything in the universe. But that wouldn't necessarily be Christian, so that's kind of interesting. If you're into figuring him out. Here's discussion about the Spanish Armada. His education, he went to the school in Malmesbury. By the way, that abbey is no longer an abbey, but it's still there. It's kind of interesting. If you visit that area, there's a garden there that is a tourist attraction. Two old people basically take care of the garden, and they're famous because they garden in the nude. I don't know if that's interesting or not, but they're old people, and most of the pictures you might see of their gardening, however, is nicely done to avoid any kind of embarrassing kind of pictures. Thomas Hobbes, when he died, ended up being buried in the smallest town in England. That's not really a tomb, but burial, maybe I'll find. He's in the floor of the church in Olt Hucknall, Derbyshire. So his gravestone lies on the church floor. So you can actually go and see the grave if you're ever to visit the smallest town in England. Okay, so that's fun. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of things I could say about Thomas Hobbes. But I do want to talk about this guy, Dr. Theodore Mayerne. There's Mayerne. There's actually different So, the quiz question for today concerns, what do you think of Theodore de Mayerne? He's actually from Switzerland. I first really got interested in him because I was reading a book that was written on him by a historian who is a good historian. That's this one. I recommend books by Hugh Trevor Roper. He's quite interesting. But this one, he was a scientist, follower of Paracelsus. So there's an earlier physician. I don't know if this says anything here about him, but notice that he was the physician to James I and Charles I of England. And what's neat is, at the time, if you were wounded by a sword and the wound became infected, the correct treatment for the infection was to have a priest bless the sword. So you needed the sword. You had to get that sword back, whatever the sword was that cut you, and you have to have a spiritual right over the sword. So in other words, healthcare was primarily thought to be a matter of spirit, soul, magic, essentially, magical rites and things of this sort. Paracelsus was different because he thought that our health actually depended on things that were physical. How do you spell it? Didn't spell it right. But he's into alchemistry. Alchemy. That's it, right? Alchemy, physical. It is a medical revolution, essentially. That physical things actually make a difference. The food you eat. This is long before they have an idea of vitamins and how fruit might be good for you and so on. But nonetheless, they're becoming aware that maybe there's chemicals involved in having a healthy body, and that toxins could be bad for you and so on. So this is also part of the modern period, that's going on. So the science associated with this is kind of important. And Dr. Mayerne was one of those influenced also by this. So I like bringing him up. This is a good book if you're ever interested. He ended up being quite rich. He was also interested in astronomy. Of course, they're interested in whether astronomy is influencing your life. There's an awful lot of that thinking, etc. How many of you know your sign, your birth sign? Pretty much everybody. I'm a Leo, if that makes any difference. The fun thing, of course, is when you get the horoscopes in the paper, cover them and read all of them, and every single one of them will apply to you. So it's they're clearly written in a style that makes it seem like, oh, you will have a good day today, or the day will really suck for you if you get out of bed. Something that will apply for everyone. That kind of stuff. Okay, so that's an interesting part of what's going on. And we also have this guy. And he's interested in the same kinds of things. So he's also interested in alchemy. And what's the difference between alchemy and chemistry? I should have asked the professor before she left. There was the class before we come in is a chemistry class. So that's kind of fun. And they just picked the Nobel Prize winners for chemistry yesterday, I think. It was in the paper this morning. So that's cool. But so he's interested in chemistry. and mathematics. Notice that he was one of those individuals that nobody really liked, especially because he was, so bright. There were some folks that got along with him and so on. And he's also involved with the Royal Society. And notice that he's also involved and connected to Leibniz, who we're going to be covering. We're going to do Spinoza, then Locke, then Berkeley, and then Leibniz. So Leibniz will be the end of this group that we're looking at. Berkeley is also involved in that. Berkeley, by the way, is the one that we have the University of Berkeley in California. Berkeley, depends. Actually Berkeley is Berkeley, but Berkeley is which? Now I'm confused. Which one is which? Okay, so we'll look at him, and if you're curious, who invented gravity?
God.
Okay.
Isaac Newton.
Isaac Newton is the classic answer to that. But actually, if you read Galileo's works, he's working with gravity. He's the one that comes up with, the speed of falling and so on. There's all kinds of interesting stuff there. In fact, we go and look at the So he's got a lot of videos now. I don't know if you follow him. Cox, his name is, and he's
spacecraft in the conditions of outer space, and it does that by pumping out the 30 tons of air in this chamber until there are about 2 grams left.
So they suck all the air out of this big chamber, and then they drop. Then they drop a bowling ball and a feather together, and they make it slow motion so it doesn't look surprising. I think if you ran it at full speed, you would be amazed at how fast the feather falls. Of course, we got good music to go with this, Sorry about that. And you can see that the feather and the bowling ball fall at the same speed. Once you don't have air. So that's kind of fun. So the problem, of course, is when Galileo argued for this Tower of Pisa, dropping objects, look out below, how they did, right? I think that really happened at the Tower of Pisa, but he also used, different devices in order to measure the speed of things falling. So basically, he's figured out the whole idea of the mathematical nature of gravity. First, Galileo was inspired by being in church and seeing the incense ball being swung in the ceiling of the church, and noticed that the period of the swing, no matter how far it was, remained the same. So it's kind of interesting, and he got interested in physics and became a math teacher at the University of Pisa. But so it's confusing to me who gets proper credit for inventing gravity, whether it's Sir Isaac Newton or. But when we also get into the question of calculus, who invented calculus?
Sir Isaac Newton, right?
Well, now that's the argument, isn't it? Because I recommend, if you're in England and you discuss gravity or calculus, as people are wont to do. I mean, whenever you're sitting there having Stein, well, they don't call them Steins, they call them pints, right? In England, liters and so on. But if you're ever in England or Ireland, Officially, Sir Isaac Newton is the person who invented calculus, and he's the one who invented gravity, right? But if you're in continental Europe, then keep in mind that there were actually wars over this. Well, not wars per se, but they had arguments over who was officially the one who founded it. If you're in Europe, you should not mention Sir Isaac Newton. It's politically incorrect. Leibniz is clearly the person who invented calculus. Not gravity, that would be Galileo, but definitely Leibniz gets credit for calculus. By the way, the symbol that you use for a function in calculus is the symbol that he used, and he called it calculus, whereas Sir Isaac Newton called it fluxions. So there's differences there. But this is absolutely fascinating because during the period where the two of them were at the same time realizing that we needed calculus, if you think, wait a minute, we've got arithmetic, basic numbers with a few verbs, or you can add and subtract, right? But then when you go up to the next step, you've got geometry. Geometry, you're talking about areas, and so you can have descriptions of the areas, but the verbs that you use are the same that you use in arithmetic. You just change the nouns that you use when you go from arithmetic to the next level. You're talking about areas. When you go to trig, that's still another group of nouns, right? But still the verbs are the same. And when you go to the next one, which is calculus, you still have the same verbs, but you end up with more nouns because now you have functions. And the functions do a lot of things, so you're comparing functions and so on. We'll talk a little bit about this when we get to Bertrand Russell and his book on the Principia Mathematica, the principles of mathematics, where he basically points out that it actually all works down to logic. When you understand logic and you understand that the different relationships that are there available in logic, then when you go to math, you're adding numbers, and when you, etc. So you're just changing the vocabulary when you go from one to the other. So that's fun. So we'll do more of that. Leviathan.